you hear him talk to you because God created everything, and music is a part of the creation. So he would naturally use it to talk to us.
Hello and welcome to Deconstructing Worship, a series of positive and constructive conversations about the current culture of modern worship. We are your hosts, Steve Quantick
and Kyle Treble. Hello, everyone, and welcome into another episode of the Deconstructing Worship Podcast. This is episode 12. 12! I think that's absolutely amazing. And we've gone past the kind of the 7-episode hump, which is apparently a thing within podcasting. Like, we're way beyond that now. That's super cool, hey?
Well, I hadn't realised that was actually a thing.
Yeah, apparently that's the thing. Speaking to my friend who has, like, been doing podcasts for years, and, like, looking at a few articles, 7 episodes is apparently where lots of podcasts stop. So, like, we're way past that.
That's it. We are way ahead of the curve. That's fantastic.
Yeah.
And of course, what better way to celebrate our 12th episode but with our very good friend and bandmate in the Rob Westall band, Stuart Ironside.
Yeah,
buddy. So, Stu, mate, why don't you just say a little bit about yourself and also, just mention a little bit more about how you know me and Kyle.
Hi, yeah, sure. So, I'm a classical guitarist primarily. Started playing when I was about 11, and then went to university in Cardiff, which is how I met Steve. And then Steve introduced me to Rob Westall, and then that's how I met Kyle.
Yeah.
So, classical guitarist for all this time, and then alongside I've got other parallel musical journeys that I've been on to an extent, playing worship guitar, playing electric for Rob Westall.
So I guess that would probably bring us in quite nicely onto question 1, which is like, what's kind of the first experience you can remember, or all the kind of first formative experience you can remember of congregational worship?
There's kind of two that really stick out in my mind. So, like I say, I played classical guitar for a while, for about six years before I ever even picked up an electric guitar for worship and thought about joining a worship band. The town I grew up in, Oxfordshire, is there's not a whole lot going on really. So I was lucky to even find a guitar teacher at all. I mean, there's a few bands around, but nothing particularly big. So there weren't a whole lot of people that I could sort of just share music with really. So when I first started going to a little youth group. And then did that for about 2 years, and then started going to a local church. They were playing all of the standard sort of your standard worship songs that have been around for about 10 years. Yeah, I'd gone to church when I was a bit younger, and my mum is a practicing Catholic, but religion wasn't a very big part of my life. But I still believed in God, but it was from an intellectual standpoint. It was more of I can't think of a reason why there isn't a God, because the universe is just so big and complicated. There's no way this just happened by accident, you know.
That's really interesting.
When I first started going to the church in Bicester that I went to, that was my first experience of like, oh, this is what church music can be, and seeing all of these people in church with their hands up, singing to the Lord and just praising Him all together. That was really eye-opening for me, and I could feel the spirit in the room, but I still didn't feel like it was there for me. So I kind of decided I was going to press into that a lot. Started playing with the worship band on a really terrible electric guitar that was like 50 quid, plugging straight into the PA rather than an amp, just anything to try and get involved. I did that for a few years, still didn't feel anything. But that first experience really stuck with me, of just coming into the room, as soon as the band struck up, seeing everyone start worshipping, just seeing everyone come together in this wonderful moment of praising God all as one voice. That really that confirmed if nothing else, it confirmed my suspicions that there is something here. And I need to keep searching for it. So I dove quite deep into it. I got confirmed, which, if anyone who doesn't know, is kind of a bit of an old-fashioned Church of England practice, where the local bishop comes down and then says, yes, you are okay to receive communion. And then I went to Soul Survivor in 2017, and first entrance to the big top 10 professional band, Hillsong-esque band, struck up with Our God by Chris Tomlin, and that was a mind blow completely. And they went through a few songs like that, and then at the end, Mike Pilavachi, who sort of runs Soul Survivor, or did, said, if there's anyone who doesn't feel like they know Jesus, come forward. And he sort of said, and I was like, yeah, why not? I'm desperate at this point. And then I went up, someone came and put their hands on me, and I just heard a tiny voice whisper in my ear saying, let me in. And I went, what? And then it happened again. And I just kind of realized that I'd been searching so hard for God, I'd blocked him out unintentionally. I wasn't just I was searching, but hadn't expected to find any answers. My heart was closed off, and it just had a little voice saying, let me in. And just opened up my heart. And I broke down like that.
Wow.
I broke down in tears, was on the floor for a good half an hour, just crying as God's love just washed over me and just filled me up completely. And I mark that as 0.0 of me becoming a Christian. Because that was the point that I really started to kind of believe in God and really sort of pressed into a relationship with him.
Yeah, I was going to say like that. I mean, that's when you went from like your head to your heart, and when you went from kind of intellectual knowing to relational knowing, isn't it? Dude, that's such a beautiful story. Thank you.
I think the musical environment definitely enhanced it, and that kind of worship setting, and just something about it made me more open to the Spirit.
Because we talked about this in previous episodes, haven't we, about how Christians are almost kind of superstitious about emotions in a worship context.
Oh, yeah.
But also, just from experience, for the past few years, with the Bean Baker Band, we were the house band at Cafe Uno, and we would play kind of covers there. And so we would see like the live stream of the evening meetings and at Soul Survivor. And like I was nothing but impressed with how well they navigated those heightened spiritual moments without hyping it up. Which I thought was so well managed. You know what I mean? And I don't kind of mean well managed in like a controlling kind of sense. It like when something is kind of when there's a spiritual experience happening, what I think Soul Survivor realized and Stuart did was you kind of explain what you need to, but you don't hype it up. You kind of just let the wave keep going.
Yeah, I think that's a real skill of like church leadership, because you want someone who can keep a level head if everyone in the congregation is losing their minds over the Spirit descending in the room, you don't want the pastor to start doing it as well, because that'll be chaos. You want someone who can kind of keep order and like you say, Steve, just facilitate the wave riding through.
Just on the I mean, I'm kind of taking a little bit of a segue, but just on the idea of like style, I guess, just because I've been thinking about and it's something I want to ask you, just as being first a classical musician. I always like to kind of ask people this, because I came from like as you probably could tell now, like my early years of music was hip hop. That was I was like massively into, and then when I came to the church, it was like, oh, okay, and it was a bit funny. What was it like for you being like a classical musician, coming into like a worship kind of set?
I think because I was classically trained, and this was kind of ingrained in me, either deliberately or through association. Classical musicians tend to have a bit of supremacy about them, and they'll think of, and I was definitely guilty of this when I started playing worship bands and learning electric guitar. You tend to think, oh yeah, worship music's easy. It's just 4 chords, there's nothing to it. It's not like you've got haven't got any diminished runs in there. There's no chromatic scales. It's whatever. and that kind of carried on for longer than I'd like to admit. Which is just a thing of classical education and the fact that all music theory tends to be taught through a classical lens, as I've talked about with YouTube lots of times before. Classical music theory and the way it's taught has a very long and entrenched history, with including links to white supremacy and Eurocentrism, but that's a whole other conversation. I think that definitely infected my attitude with worship music, and it was something that I came up against with the other members of the band who primarily came from the world of rock or worship music directly. So I was suggesting all kinds of things that just weren't suitable, because I thought, oh yeah, well, it's classical music. This is the way I would do it, and it just wasn't. It wasn't right, and it rubbed a lot of people the wrong way. So I had to unpick a lot of that. I mean, yeah, it was quite an interesting experience rubbing up against that, because there were other people in the bands that I first played with who were classical musicians by training, and they were a lot more experienced with playing in worship than I was, and I got a bit annoyed at them for not being on my side. Come on, you know classical music. What's wrong with you? Why are you stooping to this easy music level? But I think classical musicians have that way of just thinking that music is better, and it's just nonsense. Like playing pop music, or like in university, whenever we were doing the modules on pop music, it was like they were really just looked down on pop music and rock music as like inferior. Like, no, it's not. It's a different skill set. Maybe it's not as harmonically complicated, but there's still a lot in there. Like your oral listening skills have to be cranked way up as a rock musician. Or with the non-Western stuff that I played, it was like there was a lot of judgment from that, and I had to thankfully I'd unlearned a lot of that through playing in worship bands by the time I got to university, but I still saw a lot of people go through that same process. And I realized it's a top-down problem. It comes from the way that music is structured and taught, and this focus we have on teaching in such an arcane style.
It's fascinating as well. There are like kind of like two sides to it, aren't there? There's like, I've come across like, because I don't really read sheet music very well at all. I'm kind of like a tab guy, and I can, if I struggle and concentrate really hard, I can read notation. But I can obviously kind of read a chord chart really, kind of very well, and infer kind of, and like I apply a lot of memory to how my memory of how a song goes. And I've met classically trained musicians who, if it's not the dots on the page, they can't compute. You know what I mean? So it's kind of that flexibility. But there are times that I wish I could kind of read music, and the times where I wish I kind of had, the more kind of complex harmonic understanding. But also on the flip side, I see like, with classical musicians, it's like, well, this is the way it's played. So there you go.
Yeah, but then that comes with classical musicians have a very difficult time playing off music, really. You kind of get them to just think for themselves, not universally, but I think there is a definite problem in this. You get them to play off the sheet music, and their brains they'll bug out right in front of you. But that was something my teachers kind of fought against me with doing, because I kind of am a bit of a radical in this, in that I don't hold the composer of a sheet music as infallible, not just with classical music, but with anything really.
Yeah,
I kind of think that, like, to put this in a worship song context, if I think there is a better chord that fits underneath the melody, I'm inclined to use it, because it gives more agency to your performers, I think.
No, I completely agree.
Makes them into better musicians, and the best people I've met and the best composers I've met don't necessarily mind. Not with like massive things. I'm not going to change the melody so it's unrecognizable. But if I think there's something a little difference that works a bit better, that kind of freedom, or that lack of freedom, I should say, is not just baked into classical music, but it's baked into pretty much all Western music.
It's interesting. I kind of base it back, like, just coming from like my art side. I think like you want to take obviously you want to respect the works that you're performing, of course. But I think like you want to, like, if I'm gonna, take inspiration from, I don't know, some artist and then create my own, I don't want to be a copycat artist. I want to like take inspiration, Do you know what I mean? You want, like, and obviously it is a slightly different context if I'm like, playing a song, like an actual song that I need to perform to people who need to recognize this piece of music, of course. But like so many times, like I've been in a context where actually take worship for example, because that's what we're talking about. Like, do you know what I mean? I don't play the drum pattern exactly how the original guy did. Like, and sometimes it can be what you were talking about. It could be like, you know what, like, I respect this musician, but you know what? I actually think this would work way better here. You want to be like in keeping with the music and respectful, but there should be room.
This is a thing I've found with playing with certain worship leaders over time. Like, you can tell the ones who are quite happy for people to go off the script slightly versus the ones who want everything to be played exactly to track.
Yeah.
And, some of the songs we did, I remember one of the best worship times that I ever had was when I was MDing and we were doing loads of great songs, and we opened with Lion and the Lamb, and you kind of do that opening lick in the start, and then there was another guitar part that I really wanted to do, and the worship leader tried to talk me down from it. It's like, oh no, we don't want that, we'll let a keyboard fill that in. I'm like, no, it's great, and I'm going to play it on guitar. And I did it, and then people in the congregation came up to me afterwards and liked it, so I was like, yeah I was right. I think that everything is a bit too tightly controlled sometimes in worship bands.
Yeah.
We have this, not just in worship, but as Western musicians in general, we kind of have this habit of wanting everything to go exactly according to plan. Which, it's good to have a plan, but you kind of want to encourage people. Well, if you're in the moment of worship and your heart is to play this little lick because that's what God's telling you to do, or this little drum fill, or whatever, just go for it. Let people do it. Embrace the mess.
Yeah, like, definitely. Like, I think, like, especially within, like, it would be different, if I got hired by a singer-songwriter and they were like, hey, this is the song, I'd be like, okay, cool. Like, no worries. Context is different. I mean, if I got hired by Taylor Swift and she was like, hey, play this drum part like it's written on the album, I'd be like, okay, Taylor. Like, do you know what I mean? But like in church, we've got such a different kind of atmosphere where should it stay exactly like the track? Like, we're not performing these tracks as tracks. We're creating, we're ushering people into worship. Surely it should be more free.
Yeah, we talked about this previously on the podcast before, haven't we? We talked about emulating the track is a really good stop-off point, but it's a terrible destination.
Yes.
It should be a platform on which you build your thing rather than the place at which you arrive. Stu, I'd be really interested in hearing just a little bit more about your experience with non-Western music and how that kind of pertains to how does that translate into your experience of worship music?
So for a bit of context, there's two kinds of non-Western music that I'm really familiar with. One is gamelan from the island of Java in Indonesia. There's it's about 4 strains of gamelan. The one I'm familiar with is from Central Java, which, to try and explain how it sounds, imagine a bunch of bronze xylophones with a set of gongs at the back and a drummer at the front, and that's roughly how I can describe it, very roughly. There's all sorts of nuances that go with it. And then the other kind is a style called Jelia, which comes from the griots of the Mande homeland in West Africa, which primarily is from Mali, Guinea, and Senegal and the Gambia. So I mean, for one, they just operate on such different rules to Western music, just in terms of not even like harmony and tuning, just basic construction of the music. Okay. So gamelan, for instance, instead of the 1 being the first beat, you're going towards the 4. So counting 1, 2, 3, 4, 1, 2, which, to try and orientate all of your sort of musical focus as to where you're heading towards, as opposed to like the first, it's really it's really jarring.
Yeah.
And the tuning's wildly different. And then it's just, it kind of opens your mind as to what the possibilities are, really, of music and what the possibilities are in a worship context. And I think it's been mentioned on the podcast before. We've sort of fallen into this space rock category of everything in worship has to sound like the big three, which is a phrase that I very much like and I'm stealing because I think it's excellent. Yeah, we kind of fallen.
You're welcome.
And it's just like there's so much music out there and so much musical potential that why should we just be limited to this one style? I'm not saying everyone has to kind of suddenly learn to play drumming music from the middle of India, to make worship work, but there's possibilities out there, to use a very rough analogy, it's like getting married to someone and then saying on your wedding night, right, so I've decided in this marriage we're only going to communicate by email. to which you would reasonably go, what? That seems ludicrous.
There's probably marriages that do that. So
and then your partner would say, no, I've decided that email is the best way for us to communicate and to get our meaning across properly. Reply, well, what if I have access to a computer? What if, I've been staring at a screen all day? What if I don't just feel like writing an email, And
it's a great
to me, that's kind of the trap we've fallen into slightly, that these kind of space rocky songs with a synthy pad start and then a slight down chorus and then a build up and that worship drum pattern of and then repeating the bridge 5 times over. We've fallen into this thing of the correct way to worship, and it's just nonsense.
That makes me think of like a spice cupboard. Like, do you mean I love a good cooked breakfast, like a good traditional like British cooked breakfast. I love them. They're great. Do you know what I mean? But like, I don't eat that all the time. Like, I want maybe like, and I don't know how Italian this is, but like, I want a bolognese every now and then. I want some Mexican food. Like, I don't want to cook breakfast all the time. Like, because there's not very much British food that is actually British, is there? I mean, fish and chips isn't even British. So, like,
and our churches are quite culturally diverse these days. I remember trying to float the idea of an Afrobeat evening in church in Cardiff, because I remember we'd done that gospel evening and that had gone really well, and I was like, oh, maybe we should do an Afrobeat night. And it was but it was shot down pretty quickly because everyone was just like, oh, well, we don't know how that'd work. I said, well, we could, rework worship songs in an Afrobeat style or vice versa. And they're like, no, we can't rewrite Afrobeat lyrics. And I was like weird. On that specific point of like rewriting existing Afrobeat songs to have worship lyrics, that happens all the time in Africa. Like in African, there's a musician called Baba Mal who has a song called Lam Toro that is a direct note for note melody ripoff of an older song called Masana Esise. And he's just rewritten new lyrics for it. That happens all the time. Jazz musicians do it all the time. They'll just rewrite new lyrics over existing melodies and chord progressions. Like, that is absolutely a thing we could have done.
So given free reign, how would you kind of start to integrate some of these non-Western musical ideas into worship culture?
So, nicking an idea from Gamelan, there is a fundamental principle called Chenkot, where whatever melody note you're going for, you have certain instruments that are dedicated as soft instruments that will play musical patterns that kind of end on that melody note. Now, what patterns they play is kind of up to them. I mean, there are ones that are tasteful and might be correct for the situation, but you give those performers of those soft instruments creative freedom to kind of make that choice. And the variety that they can bring really makes them shine as individuals, while also teaching them to be tasteful to what the rest of the ensemble is doing and kind of learning to listen and take directions from the leader of the ensemble, in this case, the drummer. So I think that's a very simple idea we could kind of bring into worship settings. And if you think about it, singers do it all the time. They go on these massive vocal runs that are kind of, all right, Beyonce, settle down. You kind of end up thinking to yourself, like, we get it. But, they'll do this and then end up on the right melody note and no one bats an eyelid. Why can't a guitarist do that? Or a drummer? Or why can't we have a keyboard player just play a riff? And I think it comes back to this thing of, like, we're not performers. You hear that all the time. It's like, oh, it's not a performance. And to which I go, yeah, it is. Like, it's absolutely. If you look at the original etymology of the word from the 15th century, To perform just meant to accomplish something.
Oh, you are amazing, Stu. I need you to just follow me round.
To complete, it just meant to complete a task.
Nice.
We're up on stage. I don't know how many gigs you guys have been to. There's not a lot of difference between a worship band getting everyone to sing together versus, I don't know, everyone singing all the lyrics to a McFly song, really. And as a further point, I'd argue, what's the difference? Is preaching a kind of performance? I would argue that it is in a lot of ways.
Definitely.
Yeah, oratory communication, isn't it? It's like,
you've got to have a skill in performance to be able to hold an audience, like a congregation's attention like that, and lead them through.
Yeah.
Honestly, swap out the content. There's not a lot of difference between a pastor and a stand-up comedian in a lot of respects.
Yeah, I know what you mean.
I was listening to Rob Bell talking. I listened to Rob Bell talking, and he was talking about how like he fell in love with preaching when he first started doing it, and he like saw it as an art form, and he was like, I want to like work on this. I want to get better at this craft.
Once you kind of see performance as a tool to be used in a worship setting, it kind of unlocks a whole load of, and in a non-Western context, very often music is not performed as a thing in and of its. This is another sort of Western idea. We have this thing of like going to see musicians specifically do a thing, play music live, and that's not really an idea that exists in the rest of the world in a lot of places.
Fascinating.
So for West African musicians in Jalea, you'll bring out these performers for like special events like weddings or a particular praise ceremony for for a local ruler, or if it's a particular festival of some description, they'll bring them out for that. But the musicians aren't the focus in those events, but people will still celebrate their performance and their skill. And individual displays of skill are absolutely baked into, and the freedom that these individual performances have is baked into everything of the musical culture. And I recognize that's kind of a weird hump to get over for a lot of people, but to me, having been through all those experiences, it seems really weird that worship musicians aren't allowed that same freedom in the context of, like, obviously, like I say, there's stuff that there is a consideration of what is tasteful and what is appropriate. Like, you don't want people going off on 15-minute guitar solos so that, they can't sing along to the words, because that would be, I would argue, then that becomes making it about themselves. But I don't know, this control that people have over, or that worship leaders want to have over the band and all the musicians, it feels something that sits badly with me about it now.
Yeah. I remember being told about this one church that had like, they did like a training thing for like other worship musicians who wanted to go to it if they wanted to. And like, I heard like amazing things about it, but then I heard like one phrase that I was like, like as a drummer, they would have things called like, they would say, that's an illegal fill. And I'd be like, what
does that mean?
And in it, but what does that? I think it meant anything that wasn't based in, I'll say quavers for you.
Thank you.
But it's a bit of an in joke. Me and Stu have a bit of an ongoing debate whether it's called a quaver or an eighth note.
sorry, you cut out after you said quaver. I wasn't sure.
Yes, a bit. I think it was basically that. If I didn't fit into that kind of quaver grid, then it was a legal fill or something like that.
Yeah.
Super weird.
I mean, if you're going to have illegal fills, I think, well, what's the point? What's the point in having musicians?
Okay, so pedaling back just a tad, like just a little bit. Like, I mean, I think I kind of get a sense of it anyway. But like, I think that's probably because I know you. But what would you say is like your favorite thing about congregational worship?
Like, I feel like I'm being a little bit too harsh on congregational worship, ever so slightly. So my favorite thing about it is that I love the community spirit and the feel of there's no other form of like time with God that I feel God and the Spirit just descend on a mass of people all at once, and we're all kind of feeling not the same thing, but we're all in that same sort of spiritual headspace at the same time. There's nothing that I think comes close to that on just a collective level. And I really love seeing God move in that kind of collective atmosphere. And I'm being slightly harsh on worship music because, or on some forms of worship, because I genuinely love that. That is, that's how I sort of came to Jesus. That's how I continue to have my most revealing moments with him and my most powerful moments of sort of revelation. And I really want that to work as well as it can in every situation. So, yeah, I mean, it comes from a place of love, all my criticism.
Yeah, I mean, of course it does. I think like anything that you really care about, you want to see the best from it, don't you? But I tell you what, like, and obviously this is episode 12, which is super cool. But like, I'm hearing and obviously having conversations kind of outside of the podcast as well. So many people have that, like, maybe not like the exact favorite thing, but like many people have, but it's up there for so many people of like that community thing that like everyone is there together. Like, I think like just music in general, I think just does that, doesn't it? I think that's something that God has just like created. Like we've talked about before, like we're emotional beings. I think like, I don't know, that's the best way to phrase it, but like God has created music to pull community in. Like you've probably noticed it in like obviously studying like non-Western music. There's massive community that come around music, aren't there?
Yeah, I mean some of the groups you're playing with can have up to like 20 members in there, each one relying on the other. And once you play with these people for long enough, you get to such a feeling of how each of them work, what each of them is going to do in a particular moment, and you play off each other so nicely. But not just that, just being from the other perspective, you feel this quite a lot in classical concerts, just that anticipation of everyone coming together to see a particular performance and everyone sort of buzzing about it. And I mean, for another example, Steve, when we went to go and see Hamilton, you could cut the tension in that room with a knife.
Oh, it was wonderful. The atmosphere was electric.
And music has such an amazing power to facilitate that. And in a worship context, like having that tension in the room of everyone is waiting for the Spirit to descend. And then when the Spirit does descend, everyone's just feeling it. And the fact that we as musicians have the power to facilitate that through our performance, deliberate choice of word, that's amazing. What an awesome gift to have,
Isn't it?
I'm truly, truly blessed to consider myself a musician who can do that bring about the Spirit with God. That's amazing to me. I love it.
Yeah. Yeah, there's something really humbling about, like, I kind of think like I'm massively into space, and I think the main reason is because I look at it and I follow like NASA's Instagram and like lots of other ones, and I look at it and it makes me feel so incredibly small but so incredibly loved when I look at it. And there's just that in it. And I think about like, me as a musician, I'm playing some drums. I'm playing this little thing made out of a few pieces of wood, a few pieces of mylar and things like that. And I'm using this really technically kind of quote unquote insignificant thing to usher in the presence, not that he's not there, but like to usher in that recognition of God's presence. Like, God, I'm using this tiny little thing called a drum set to help people notice the divine. Like, that blows my mind. Like...
It's meant the fact that we can help the Spirit descend by making air go wiggly.
Yeah,
is what we're doing.
It's basically, yeah, exactly. making the air vibrate in certain frequencies is like, oh, there we go.
Shouldn't be called musicians. Should be called air wigglers.
I'll take that.
Air wigglers. Yeah. And that's
air wigglers. Professional air wiggler.
I'm gonna change my Instagram bio. So, Stuart, I'd love to kind of just return to something we were talking about before, because, I mean, I just don't want to be unfair to worship leaders too much, because you're talking about kind of almost like a need for control that some worship leaders have. Where do you think that so would you like to kind of contextualize that a bit? Like, where do you think that kind of quote unquote need for control, desire for control might come from.
Yeah, I do want to emphasize it's not universal to all worship leaders. Like, it's not a universal trend I've seen. I played with some incredible worship leaders who are just so happy to just let the band, any suggestions that I bring up. I remember one of the first kind of church services that I led as a musical director. It's one of the songs, I Will Give Thanks to the Lord. And I was talking with the worship leader about arrangements, and I said, do you know what? This needs a disco beat. And he was like, are you sure? I was like, do you know what? Yeah, I'm feeling the Lord tell me this needs a disco beat and it needs to be fast tempoed. And he was like, sure, let's go with it and see what happens.
That's awesome.
It wasn't a plan of anything. We didn't go through the minutiae of every detail. I just checked with the drummer, can you play a really fast 4 on the floor?
Yeah.
And he went, yeah. I'm like, okay, let's do this. And it was a bit messy and a kind of chaotic in rehearsal, but it came together in the end. And I've had tons of experiences like that certainly outweighed the bad ones. So I do want to preface that. But I think it's been a recurring theme on the podcast episodes that I've listened to. People are just a little bit afraid to embrace the mess of worship. And I understand it. Like, you want worship to be this kind of rehearsed time that you can facilitate people's independent reactions and people bringing their own baggage to a worship service. You want to have a structure in place so that it doesn't go too off the rails, so that people have some confines that kind of resemble what they're used to, so that they can come forward. They'll feel more comfortable coming forward and bringing their problems before God. You don't want to just throw them into something that they don't recognize and say, here you go, deal with this. And also have a revelation at the same time.
I think there might also be possibly some fear in there as well, because like some legitimate fear. Because when I have been in positions of church leadership in the past, you suddenly realize that it does, for some people, it puts a target on your back. It makes you an antenna for negative energy in a lot of ways, because people, like, as we've kind of heard about before, like, people generally, I mean, you just have to look at the comment section on any any Instagram thread or whatever. I mean, like, a friend of mine shared with me like a live feed from a volcano that had like erupted overnight and looked amazing. There's a live feed of a volcano on YouTube somewhere. And I opened up the comment section, and surely enough, there was somebody trolling and calling people names. It's like, even on like a live stream of a volcano, like, it's absolute insanity to me. But like, in Christian contexts, especially when people kind of feel, as we talked about, when people like are being consumerist and when they feel entitled to a certain worship experience, I think there's quite possibly sometimes legitimate fear in there, where it's just like, gosh, what if I take this risk and it puts a target on my back? Because those things can be quite hard to kind of get past. I've experienced it when a particular person in a church congregation takes a dislike to you and how you carry yourself and how you do things, and the cloud that can cast over your ministry.
Yeah, absolutely. Like, I'm not suggesting everyone needs to suddenly dive off the deep end and sort of let things go absolutely sprawling all over the place straight away. But it is a thing that we can encourage and rehearse and kind of little by little, like you were saying, like Wayne was saying a couple of episodes ago, it's kind of, you can encourage not just the younger generation, but I think worship musicians as a whole to kind of small baby steps towards something a bit more messy. Say, okay, we'll try this. Maybe if it doesn't work, it doesn't work.
Yeah.
And you've tried it, and I think through that you get better at listening to what God wants you to do in a particular moment, and just learning to trust that instinct a bit better. But I think it does legit fear of wanting to keep the congregation happy, because if you think internet comments are bad, angry church congregations are another thing entirely. And I've been on the receiving end of that a couple of times.
It just makes me think, and this, like, to be fair, so many of these conversations have brought me back to what Lois said in episode 4, and I think I just want this tattooed on me. Like, again, I'm paraphrasing, but like, she was talking about how, imagine how different church would be if everyone turned up and were just like for each other and realized how loved they were. Like, we would like this, all of this would go away.
Just a shifting of mindset, really.
Yeah.
Cool. So Stu, let's bring it into our third question then. We've already kind of again hinted at a whole bunch of things, but what would you change about congregational worship?
So to kind of distill it down into one thought, it's this: I want the music to be taken as seriously as the singing, as a form of worship. Not just music specifically. I want all expressions of art in any way to be taken seriously as a declaration of God's love. But music specifically, because I kind of know about that. You look at the Psalms and you see the amount of Psalms that playing skillfully alongside singing joyously, like Psalm 33. It happens all the time, and they're given equal weighting in the eyes of the Lord. You know, God absolutely lights up when he sees us playing our music with skill and joy on our faces. And it pains me to see that kind of stifled and not taken seriously.
Yeah.
And I kind of want, and there's loads of ways you can unpack that and elements of that. Like we've kind of hinted at already, but I think there is a lot of art in arrangement for a particular setting.
Definitely.
One of the things I love about playing with you guys and with Rob Westo in the band is that he takes the arrangements as seriously as the songs. It's like, what is the right arrangement for this song at this particular moment? You know, does it need kind of more drums, more guitars, or is it more of a stripped back sort of affair? We can absolutely impart that into our worship settings. You know, not every song has to have that build up and, you know, that synth pad start and verses going round. We can just have one person with a guitar for one song. Yeah, I want worship to put the music on at a similar level as the singing, because the other thing is we get people in the bands who aren't singers necessarily. I'm not a great singer by any stretch of the imagination.
I can't sing at all.
Yeah, I'll do it in a worship context, but how many times have you played drums, Kyle, or Steve played guitar and just felt God connect with you as you were playing something?
Yeah.
Like the way I talk to God most of all these days is I'll just sit down with my classical guitar and just start playing. I'll just, you know, let the fingers take me, and just that'll be my time to have conversation with God. And through the music, I'll hear God's voice.
Yeah.
And it kind of pains me that that's stifled down in some circles.
It makes me think of like kind of when people sing or talk or pray like in tongues, and you know, like I've heard people like, you know, regardless of what your view is on tongues, I am one that does do and advocates for it. Like for me, it's this way of, because my words can get in the way sometimes. Do you know what I mean? I especially with like I've kind of struggled with like OCD since I was about 15, 16. So like I can get into, and I'm way better than I used to be, but I can get into a bit of a like repetitive thing, and those habits will kind of and have done massively encroached on my prayer life. So for me, tongues was this way of being able to just connect with God, and I didn't have to think about what I was saying. I could just connect and just be. And I feel like as well on the same level, the same idea that like playing my instrument, I'm not saying words or trying to make sure I'm saying the correct words, or, you know, saying Father God every single second and making sure I say in Jesus' name and all this stuff. And I can just be, and I can connect, and I can worship, I can talk, and I think we need to give space to that.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, you know, in Job, it talks about music was there at the creation. the stars sang and the angels were filled with joy. I'm paraphrasing slightly, but like, to switch to another art form, if someone was to do a painting of a particularly beautiful sunset, and it was a wonderful painting, and kind of, you wouldn't then go and ask it, well, you know, it's meaningless unless you were directly inspired by God when you were doing this. You think, like, well, isn't the creation of art enough for for the power of God? And we've kind of alluded to it before. Isn't the fact that we can get the Spirit to descend through our music enough? Like, why does it have to be so orientated? Why can't we just play skillfully as the Lord would want us to do? No. So yeah, that's what I'd kind of try and encourage a focus of. And I might be slightly biased because I've played so much music out there, but it's kind of made me, you know, there is so much music out there to be explored, and God's love flows through all of it. And it's all on the table to be used as an expression of love. And, you know, I don't want anyone saying that music is not valid on its own as worship.
I really just want to like fist bump you right now. Because it's so true, isn't it? I feel like, especially, and you know way more about this than I do. I think maybe it'd be interesting to get you on to do like a specific non-Western kind of worship podcast episode. I think that'd be really cool. But like, we can get so bogged down in, well, this is the way it's done. Do you know what I mean? Like, this is the way it's done, so like this is the way we'll do it.
Oh, it's nonsense. Tradition is just peer pressure from dead people.
Oh,
that's not my quote. I wish I'd come up with that. That's not mine. But, but I kind of live by that because, yeah, like, this is the way it's done is not a good enough reason for me.
Yeah.
Like, if we're saying this is the way it's done, we should be continually asking, well, why? And is there a way we can do this better or be more encouraging? And I say all this out of love. And I say this because I love worship music, and I just love music, and I love seeing God come through in music. I wanted to bring this up, but Wayne preempted me when he talked about 21 Pilots and how their lyrics, like, they're both Christian. They've got a song called Screen, and I don't know if it's specifically related to anything, but the opening line of the song Screen is, I don't know why I would go in front of you and hide my soul, because you're the only one who knows it.
Wow.
I don't know about you two. I hear God in that song.
mate.
Yeah.
It's good.
And I've had so many experiences like that of God speaking to me through a whole shebang of music. I've had him
me
talk
too,
to me
dude.
through
Yeah.
instrumental, classical, gamelan, Chalia, Afrobeat, all Patagonian wind chimes, you know. You hear him talk to you because God created everything, and music is a part of the creation. So he would naturally use it to talk to us.
Yeah, I think it's quite a kind of big-headed mentality to kind of think that our way of doing it is the way where we can like usher in that kind of atmosphere. And I'm
Have
like,
a monopoly on it, do we?
really? Yeah, like really, like I mean, this style, this kind of, and don't get me like, I had to preface this all the time because I don't want people getting the wrong idea. Like, I love so much of CCM. There's so much kind of like of this modern worship culture that I really, really like, but it's one tiny little segment or one little tiny plate of this massive smorgasbord that we could be eating from.
Yeah, I love a lot of Hillsong's songs, and Bethel and Jesus Culture and all that. I love it. I absolutely love it. And it was the thing that got me properly into being a Christian and got like, it will always have a special place in my heart. But there's so much more out there as to what we could be doing. And there's so much more, there's so many techniques and ways of performing that we can pick up and use.
Yeah.
And we're so set in our ways in the West. And not to make this too political, it strikes me as a tiny bit colonial as well. Like when Wayne said in I'm using Wayne a lot because that was a really good episode, and he made quite a lot of important points that I wanted to pick up on.
Yeah, it was.
When Wayne said that they had to actively work to bring in some African styles of worship into his church in South Africa.
In South Africa, yeah.
That Christianity doesn't have a great history with imposing our style of worshipping God onto new people and new places that we discover throughout the world. And whatever you think of missionary work, that was a pretty big deal and a pretty big problem in the missionary work in the New World and the Polynesian Islands and everywhere. We don't have a great history with that. And it strikes me that our kind of enforcement of CCM, or not enforcement, but subtle push towards CCM it has undertones of that kind of rubbed me the wrong way. But I don't think that's a conscious effort. I just think it's a byproduct and an unpleasant one at that.
Yeah, definitely. I think it's just one of those things that we just need to be aware of, don't we? Because like kind of you said earlier, that like the people, I mean, I hope so anyway, but like the people who are involved, they're not thinking their stuff. They're not thinking, I want to impose my, like, it's...
None of us ever think we're doing that. It's just a system we grow up in.
Yeah. I think it was Bryn a few weeks ago who mentioned this idea that, you know, I think a part of it comes from this idea of like second guessing the people that we're playing for, or second guessing our audience without asking them.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. You know, who knows? They might be okay with just doing CCM all the time.
Yeah, and like kind of,
if that works, great. But you don't want to just assume. Yeah,
and it kind of come up. We've had this conversation a few times as well, and it's like talking about how like we should kind of aim to base our kind of the way we worship around the culture of our church. Do you know what I mean? So if you have like the church I used to go to had like, I'd say maybe even 50%, maybe a little bit less, but of like a black congregation, but we still did kind of the CCM stuff. And to be honest, like there is that side of me then that kind of goes like, I definitely think we need to be open to it. Like, but obviously like the people who were attending didn't have a big deal with it. Otherwise they would have gone somewhere else. And it's like, because there was, you don't want to assume. I feel like sometimes without getting too political, I feel like sometimes as white people, we can, like, and especially on the more kind of liberal side, which we all are, I think, we can almost, and like speaking to some of my kind of non-white friends, there can almost be that sort of white savior mentality of like, we almost get angry for them and they're like, we don't care. Like, do you know what I mean? Like we're fine, dude. Like, so in that old church I used to go to, there was a gospel church literally the other side of the street. So it clearly wasn't that big a deal. But I think if we could just be aware of it, just make sure that we're aware of it, we're bringing it and we're thinking, you know what? Hey, we do have like a large congregation of whatever kind of ethnic group it is, whether it's, you know, Indian or whatever. I'm going to go, you know what? Hey, let's be aware of that. And then also just as a musician, hey, let's see if we can just learn some of this stuff, like upskill and see if we can bring some of these awesome ideas musically into our own, because I mean, it's only going to make it better, isn't it?
It's interesting you say that. They teach you to be sensitive about these kind of issues when you do ethnomusicology, which is like study of musical anthropology, basically. They teach you to be sensitive to issues of neocolonialism and cultural appropriation when you're learning about these musics. But it's really interesting that almost all of the accusations of cultural appropriation I've had have been from white people.
Come from white people, yeah, of course they do.
From white Europeans, because all of the musicians in these traditions, the native musicians of these traditions that I talk to, are just like, I bring it up and they're like, what the hell are you on about?
Yeah, what are you talking about? Yeah.
Yeah, it's great. It's great that outsiders are playing our music. Why would people have a problem with that?
Yeah.
And then conversely, I've had it from Christians that, like one or two kind of extreme Christians who like denounced me for playing non-Western music in a lot of ways.
That's weird.
Yeah, because the countries that these traditions come from are primarily Islamic countries. So there's that association, but
yeah, okay.
Yeah, but there's lots of Muslims in this country who play rock music.
Yeah, exactly.
Like And that's what I mean. And one of the guys who taught me to play Javanese gamelan is a Christian pastor, like in the Church of England.
Yeah.
And Christians exist in this country. When I went to a tour of Indonesia, we went to a Catholic service that used gamelan.
Awesome.
Oh, that's cool, dude.
It was really cool. It was really weird and really jarring, but they used it. Like, God created all music, really. And everything, like I said before, everything is for the taking. And everything is for us to use to express his glory. So we just need to be aware of it and be more open to the possibilities of it.
It's like Kyle was saying earlier, you kind of see how huge the universe is, right? Like, you have like Triton, one of the moons around Neptune, that are basically like liquid nitrogen geysers, like, these like ice volcanoes.
Space is scary, man.
Yeah, and you have Venus, where and again, this is, I guess, probably a great example of like us trying to impose our logic on things. A day on Venus is longer than a month on Venus because it takes longer for it to spin around once than it takes it for it to travel around the sun. That's it, isn't it? When you see in the universe, you see such a diversity of creativity. You see such kind of weird and wonderful, probably just as weird as wonderful environments and ways of experiencing time and ways of experiencing atmosphere and it's not, I don't think, because to say it's arrogant is to kind of almost insinuate some kind of deliberate slight or malice to it, but it is just like almost like a blinkeredness, you know what I mean? It's just like, I don't know, what do we miss out on in being, a lot of Christians are quite anti-science. And it's like, what do we miss out on? You know what I mean? Like I'm not afraid of science because when I look at science, I see the wonder of, how intensely diverse and amazing this universe is. Because there are like, what was it? And like, there are like particles that exist out there that can exist in two places at once.
Yeah, that blows my mind, dude. Like what? Like,
it's fantastic, isn't it? Isn't it fantastic? I'm totally with you, Carl, in terms of like the bigness of the universe makes me feel more loved because it's just like the universe is so huge and yet God knows my name. Yeah. Absolutely, and it's just like, and I think there was actually a phase in worship music, wasn't there? Where like the Face Down DVD, where Louis Giglio would talk a lot about astronomy and about how
I love Louis Giglio.
Yeah.
Did you see that video? Did you see that video where he did like because you was talking about with like the stars singing? Did you see that video where he kind of had the captured audio of stars, and there's like, it makes me kind of, hello.
So that video, I remember seeing one where they were talking about like the shapes of different galaxies, and then in this one that was 100 million light years away was the shape of a cross.
Yeah.
Right in the middle of the galaxy. Man, it's just
in the middle of a nebula, I think, wasn't there? Yeah, something like that. It's amazing. So, mate, much as I'm a big space nerd as well, but like probably not a big enough space nerd to have talked with any degree of accuracy. Sorry to any of the scientists who are listening. Please listen. Sorry to any scientists who are listening. Please do correct me on. Yes, please don't come for us. So Stu, thank you so much for joining us, and thank you everybody who's listening at home or on your commute or whatever. And we look forward to seeing you for our almost the final episode of the season next week. We're closing in.
Yeah, I know, it's
closing
crazy.
On the final few episodes of the season.
I also think it'd be a good idea, like, just because kind of calling back to episode 1, I think it was, where you were talking about, like, hope everyone enjoys this, whether you're abseiling down a mountain. Maybe we should just pick a new thing every time. So I hope you're enjoying this if you are in a space shuttle, just to come off of.
See you next week, everybody.
Bye-bye. Thank you for listening to this week's episode of Deconstructing Worship. We hope that you got as much from it as we did. We would absolutely love to have you all involved in these conversations, so please find us at Instagram and YouTube, both under the handle at Deconstructing Worship. And please send in any emails with any questions or anything that you would love involved within any kind of future episodes. And our email is deconstructingworship@gmail.com. And we will talk to you next week. Bye-bye.